is changing, because we are looking at more families, more parents opening up to the idea of an international or education that is outside this continent, And one asks the question then, what is fueling these change of heart? What is making more families look at, aside from what it is we know, what it is we went through, we want our children to experience other options of education that is out there. What is fueling that?
I think, first of all, what's fueling it is more access. So, of course, if you have more options, you want to shop around and choose the best option. Also, what we just talked about before, parents are recognizing the interconnectedness. They're recognizing the importance of global competence for their children to be successful in global contexts and in global markets, but also to be personally enriched as people. But I think there's something more that's driving it. And I think, and this is probably the key part of the answer to your question, there's a discontent with what they're being offered in their own bubble or within their own national systems or local systems. And I think that this is not a problem that's specifically African. I think the same thing is happening in Europe. I think the same thing is happening across the globe. Parents are recognizing that the national curricula or the state prescribed curricula and their approach to education are outdated, they're insufficient, and that discontent and dissatisfaction with what their children are experiencing in their own schools, broadly speaking, for the most part, there are exceptions, of course. I went to public school myself, state school in the United States, and I had a great experience, but it could have been better. And I think what that discontent is built around is the fact that the approach to education that you're seeing in most schools that are part of a national curriculum, or even in some private schools across the world, is really not any different fundamentally than education that was offered in the middle of the 20th century in its approach. And in fact, some of the approaches that were offered in the century before are still in place. So people will talk the talk. They will say, we're reforming education. We're moving away from content, and we're going to focus on competencies. You hear this from almost every government across the world. They're not really putting their money where their mouth is, though, because teachers are feeling the pressure to deliver a large amount of content, and in some cases that's increasing, in other cases it's being reduced. And so this, we're doing skills and we're doing competencies, is in many ways a sideshow, or takes a back seat to the actual delivery of content, which is what the teacher means when they say, I've got to cover my curriculum for the year, because ultimately they have to take national examinations later, or another type of examinations, and they feel this immense pressure to deliver content. And the problem with a knowledge-driven or knowledge-centered learning environment is that that content has to be limited to the people who've set that curriculum, and it's usually created through a cultural lens. It usually focuses on a limited amount of history, or the parameters that particular individuals who wield the power think of what is important to learn, and not necessarily what that child feels is important to learn. So back to the proverb from Libya, the shoe doesn't fit. Because that child might have other interests, that child might have a composite cultural identity. Like I would say, I'm a German and an American. And so what they're being given, a content-driven curriculum that's pretty much the same with a little variation for all the students in that particular school context, is not meeting the expectations of that child. And that child will grow bored, that child will grow frustrated, that child will feel that they are not seen within that classroom. Of course, there are exceptions, because there are wonderful teachers everywhere, and I want to give a shout out to my fellow educators who are on the front lines each and every day, working hard despite the structures and the systems. And I just find that international education allows us to truly center education around competencies, around concepts, the bigger ideas, around the individual child, and their goals if we're bold enough to take advantage of the flexibility of that type of curriculum. And if we're bold enough to do that, and I'll tell you, most international schools are not bold enough to do it. They still deliver a core curriculum focused on those high-stakes assessments that come later. And I think that is fueling the discontent. The personalization of learning is not happening in a way that will keep children inspired, that will keep them hungry and thirsty for knowledge, and that will keep the fire of intellectual curiosity that we are all born with. We're all born to be researchers and explorers of the world around us. And if you have children, you know that. You know how children look at the world bright-eyed, and as soon as they can speak, they're asking questions nonstop, right? So why do they stop asking questions? They stop asking questions because school bores them to death or frustrates them to death or stresses them to death. And schools can do better. We must do better, especially because our future is in many ways so uncertain, and the challenges that we face seem insurmountable. So it's not good enough to deliver a 20th century cookie cutter education to children anymore. Rather, the things that we noticed already in the early 20th century about what was wrong with school in the previous centuries, that it needs to be more experiential, that it needs to be more authentic, that it needs to be more learner-centered, that students need to take risks and learn outside of the four walls of the classroom. We have to finally do it. We've known it for over 100 years. Now it's time for us to do it. And I do think schools are doing it bit by bit, but I think our school in Rwanda is trying to do it more radically, and we need to kind of keep pushing those boundaries.
We haven't heard much about the